Rakamaumau.
Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, welcome this evening to Te Tuhi and Laser Tamaki Makaurau Roundtable, Haupapa, the Chilled Breath of Raku Mau Mau. He kara kia tātou. Kia tau iho te tauwhirotanga o te wāhi ngaro e pai ai te noho tahi a Tinana Wairohoki, whirohia te manawa ki te tau aroha, kia whakamaua ki a tīna, haumi e, hui e, taiki.
Taiki.
Welcome everybody to Haupapa, the Chilled Breath of Raku Mau Mau. It's an online data responsive artwork created by orator Ron Bull of Kaitahu, Kati Mamoi, Waitaha, artist Janine Randerson, Ngāti Pākehā and AUT, sound artist designer Rachel Shearer, Rongo Whakata, Te Aitanga a Mahaki, Ngāti Pākehā from AUT, mountaineer, glaciologist Heather Purdy, Ngāti Pākehā, University of Canterbury, and creative technologist Stefan Marks, Ngāti Pākehā of AUT. We are supported here tonight by Te Tuhi Gallery, Laser Talks, Niwa National Institute of Air and Water. I'm now just pass it over to Hirani Himona, ngā mihi kia koutou. Welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm the director of Te Tuhi, a publicly funded contemporary art gallery in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Te Tuhi is part of the World Weather Network, and our weather station, as part of that project, Huere Weather Eye, Weather Ear, is curated by Janine Randerson. And that will showcase 6 artist projects over the course of the year. These are our weather reports. So we're here tonight to talk about one of those artworks, weather reports, and I wanted to just say thank you and welcome to the team of artists and collaborators who have created this work and who are here to discuss it with you tonight. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Hirani, thank you for that. Just before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping, just to make sure that you please keep your videos turned off and your audio off as well until we get to the question and answer section later in tonight's session. And we will then be allowing you to ask questions. Obviously, please feel free to ask questions. You can either do that through the chat or you can just put your hand up. There's a function, obviously, in Zoom where you can put your hand up and we will endeavour to get to your questions and answer those. So, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, ko Marie Sheehan taku ingo Ngāti Maniapoto Waikato Ngāti Tuwharetoa. I am your chair for tonight, and I'm here on behalf of Laser Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous by Leonardo, the International Society for Art Sciences and Technology, and also as a representative of Auckland University of Technology. With me tonight, the participants at the talk tonight, I'm joined here by creator, orator Ron Bull of Kaitahu, Kati Mamoi, Waitaha, sound artist, designer Rachel Shearer, Rongo Whakata, Te Aitangi a Mahaki, Ngāti Pākehā, and as I said, mountaineer glaciologist Heather Purdy, and creative technologist Stefan Marks, and artist Janine Randerson. Each one of them are going to introduce themselves to you now and give a little bit of background on who they are and their role in this project. So firstly, we are going to go to Ron. Kia ora, Ron.
Kia ora koutou, kei te mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ko taki timu rawa, ko te whatawhata o ku mauka, ko apari matiawa he rere atu ki te ara kiwa. Ka rere te wai o te ara kiwi ki te moana, tā poka tā whaki ki te mautiri titi o taka whanauka, ko kanawera, tūkua tēnei mautiri titi, ko Ron Bull tōku goa. So kia ora koutou. Yeah, just in that, the landscapes that I go to call home and to feed my puku, down on the south coast of Te Waipounamu, in those cold waters of Te Ara Kiwa, where Kiwa, the great big whale, came through and bit Rakiura off the mainland and left a whole lot of little islands sitting around, including the Titi Islands that our family go to. And that's the place that I go to get that sustenance for the wairua, for the tinana, and for the puku as well. Plenty of titi, plenty of kina down there. Yes, thank you very much for coming this evening and for inviting us on board. In that introduction, I forgot what the initial question was, which is typical, isn't it, for someone that sits around telling stories all day? But I think that was my part in this whole conversation with this wonderful narrative that we've put up. It's a narrative that comes from the landscapes that my people live in, that we've walked through for years, but it's a narrative of the landscape of the breath and the light touch and the footprints and the creations that were put in place before people came into the landscape. So it's a bit of an honor for me to breathe in the landscape that we're from, that the tupuna are from, that our whakapapa goes back to those very first people, Rākaiho too, that very first person that came down and named the lakes. There's a great honor, but it's a very humbling privilege to go into that landscape, breathe the breath of the atua and call their names using their own breath. So my role within this project was to breathe, was to bring that breath of those atua in and to let their names be heard, to hongi and ha, to breathe in, to breathe out, to highlight the names of those very important atua, those creation stories, everything that allow us to exist, to let them have voice in a simple way.
Kia ora, Ron. Ngā mihi ki a koe. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have some questions for each one of you later on in this evening's presentation. I'm now going to go to Rachel. Ngā mihi ki a koe, Rachel.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, Marie, and ngā mihi ki a koutou. Thank you. So, hei uri ahau no te Whakahau Rauta, me Taki Timu, me HMS Auckland. Ko rongo whakaata, ko Ngāti, ko te aitanga māhaki, ko Ngāti Pākehā ngā iwi, ko Ngāti Kaipō te hāpū, ko Manutuki te marae, ko te poho o Rukupo te whare. My role in this wonderful kaupapa actually came through my connection with Janine originally, around I'd been looking at old, a kind of like a history of Aotearoa through data and usage of land, and one of the sets of data was around glaciers. And this ended up being a conversation. This had been something that Janine had, initiated this project, and we talked about. My interest is in sound recording. My interest is in listening to the whenua, the technologies, both Māori and Pākehā, in terms of listening to the whenua. And so this was my role, is how I could, and towards an artwork. Have the privilege of going down there. What an extraordinary landscape, and what a privilege too to have Ron to be able to guide us in that landscape, and to listen to the whenua down there. So to collaborate with the space and collaborating with all these wonderful people. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rachel. Ngā mihi ki a koe. We're now going to go to Heather. Kia ora, Heather.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi Marie for your lovely introductions, and ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, all the people who are joining us here tonight. So I'm, as Marie highlighted, I'm a glaciologist, and I'm a academic at the University of Canterbury here in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. I've been studying glaciers in Ka Tiritiri o Te Moana, the Southern Alps of New Zealand, for nearly 2 decades now. And have been walking up and down Haupapa Tasman Glacier for 15 years, both for enjoyment as someone who loves being in the mountains, as well as for my mahi, for my research. So I was absolutely delighted when Janine reached out and contacted me and advised me that they were launching into this project, and would I be interested in joining to help contribute some of the taio, pūtaio, some of the science and the research of the glacier and how the glacier is changing, and contribute to the project in that way. And I was delighted because it was such a great opportunity to work with the whole team, Ron, Rachel, Mark, as well as Janine. So yeah, it's really good. Thank you.
Kia ora, Heather. We do some questions for you later as well. We're now going to go to Stefan. Kia ora, Stefan.
Kia ora, ko Stefan Ahau, ko Pakeha Te Iwi, and that's as far as my Maori goes. And I wish I would have more ties to the land, that I can talk in that extent that Rachel just did, but I first generation Pakeha. So anyway, I'm German. Anyway, so yeah, I've been approached by Janine for this project as well, and to provide the technical background, the tying all the data feeds together and creating the website. So my background is in computer science, but I don't call myself a computer scientist anymore because that's too limiting. Being a creative technologist is what I would name myself, because I span more than the technical sides. And these projects where you bring together such a variety of aspects and culture and language and science, this just, I couldn't resist. So that's why I'm on board, and my specialty is visualization, data telling, data storytelling, data-driven storytelling, and this was the perfect task for that, and a challenge and a beautiful outcome in the end, I find. So yeah, thank you.
Kia ora, Stefan. Thank you. Kia ora. And last but not least, Janine. Good evening. You're on mute, I'm afraid. Could we unmute Janine, please?
Yeah, there was several prompts asking me to unmute myself there. But, kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Janine Randerson tōku ingoa. I'm coming to you from Onehunga, Tāmaki Makaurau on Te Wāhua Whenua. And yeah, I guess my role in this project has kind of been a bit the glue, kind of bringing everybody together. And we spent a long time actually preparing for this project through COVID. That meant that we were all kind of holed up in our respective parts of the islands. And so we had a lot of online discussion before we actually came together down at Haupapa. And the first trip, Heather took us through and carried around a portable weather station, so we got to sense the elements. But before that, there was a few kind of transactions of data, and Heather did this amazing recording deep down inside one of the crevasses, which she studied inside the Haupapa Tasman Glacier. So there was a bit of an initial project where I was playing with that. And then finally, we managed this year to all get together down on the site with Ron as well to take us through the first trip. I think you were saying we just needed to greet Haupapa in the way we felt best. I think you were on the phone, Ron, telling us what to do. But yeah, it was really nice. I think the experience of being there, but then also trying to find something of the place that we could share, and a place that is transitioning incredibly rapidly from ice to water, and to honor this shift, not in a memorializing melancholic sort of way, but to try and actually sort of be with this place at the moment of release of the ancient airs inside. So I'll stop there, because we'll start to come back to some of these questions and prompts. But my tools were underwater video cameras and talking and listening and being with, I think.
Wow. Kia ora, Janine. What an amazing, rich project that's bringing so many disciplines together in such a rich way. You know, we've got everything from science to artistry to narrative to mātauranga Māori with underpinning, it sounds like that's what's really underpinning all of this research and artistry that's happening. With that in mind, I would like to go to you, Ron. Obviously being haukainga and mana whenua. So I wanted to ask you, as part of the kaitahu whakapapa history, you have described haupapa as the breath of the atua. Can you please briefly describe what this means to you?
I sure can. And within our creation stories, within that meta-narrative that informs who we are, when we talk about the relationship with Raki Nui and Papa Tuanuku, with the earth and the sky. We talk about the sky having, Raki Nui having a relationship before that with Pukoharo e te Po, with all of the weather patterns and everything that lies beyond what we know. And from that relationship comes Aoraki, of course, the lands that we live in, down here in the South Island, Te Waka Aoraki, but also with Raka Maumau. And with those stories, Raka Maumau, from Raka Maumau came Te Wānui o Te Ao, all the winds that blow on our, and all the weather patterns that affect the earth, including Tāwhiri Mātea. So there's a distinctive difference in the meta-narrative that we have down this end of the world that actually talks about Tāwhiri Mātea being part of a different relationship than that relationship between the sky and the earth. But it comes in. It comes in with that, you know, with the raki. So when we invoke that name, Raka Maumau, we're talking about those atua, those gods, if we could, those meta-narratives, those stories of creation from a completely a Waitaha, I would even suggest, perspective, dating back before the tahu and before the Māmoe. And it's interesting, and I'll deviate a wee bit because I do at times. Within those meta-narratives as well, in the Rarotonga, they talk about Raka, and in Hawaii, they talk about La'a Maumau. So there's a similar narrative going on in different places in the world that have that same story about winds. But the narrative of Raka Maumau and the hau, all of those winds and the weather patterns and everything that impacts upon the earth hits in that place there, right beside Aoraki on the haupapa, which is one way of understanding the name of the glacier and of the place, of the winds and how it hits the earth, the land, and how it captures maku, the moisture, and all of those other different wind patterns that come within that place, that land in that place. So from a Kaitahu perspective, it's the narrative is the cradle of who we are as a people. It talks about the landscapes that we live in. It talks about Aoraki being that highest mountain, but the beginning of the landscapes. And it talks about also where all of those weather patterns come from, that whakapapa, and interact with the Papa Tuanuku and with the people that eventually come into that place. So for us, it's that creation story, but it's the cradle of who we are in relation to that larger whakapapa going way back.
Oh, just want to come down now and just spend days and days and days and weeks with you, just learning all this amazing and rich knowledge that you hold. Kia ora for that, Ron. And I suppose, kind of like moving on from that, it's like, how do you feel about opening your kaitahutanga or stories to scientific and artistic interpretation, that what you've done here in this particular project?
Yeah, I'm more than happy for the scientists to listen to our stories and validate their own narratives. And when I say that, when I think about the idea of a meta-narrative, of a large story, a creation story that makes sense of the world, the universe, and everything. For us as kaitahu, as I just indicated before, well, for us as Māori, we have our indigenous knowledge systems that are informed by the atua, by the gods. A simple way I look at the atua, a naturally occurring phenomenon. So that all of those things out there that predate who we are as people, that were here, that form the earth, that are everything. And part of the whakapapa, which is very important, making sure that we understand it's part of the whakapapa of who we are. Without that, we're not here. Simple. So I love sharing the narrative, that particular kaitahu narrative, as it fits in with an iwi Māori narrative and an island narrative, those traditional indigenous knowledge systems, and then asking questions of those other knowledge systems, asking questions of the meta-narrative of science. Hold on a minute, what's the story about this Big Bang? Nā te pō, ko te ao, there was darkness and then there was light. What's the first thing that existed in the universe that allows anything else to come in? Ko maku, well, it's moisture. And we always look for moisture somewhere else. So for me, articulating and sharing our perspective on the world, the universe and everything, and how we fit in and out of it, which is, I think, the most important part of this kōrero, is allowing people to examine A, our meta-narratives, but B, also their own, and to think to themselves, this is the way I view the world, the universe and everything. This is how it ties in for me. But what does it actually mean for me as a person within this landscape? And can I learn from those different narratives, learn the similarities and the differences within those? So the sharing of knowledge can only help validate that and legitimate that the Western scientific knowledge.
Fantastic. Kia ora, Ron. Thank you for that. Which kind of brings me to an interesting question I've just percolated in my brain. So when, as manuhiri and as the artistic team and the scientific team that sit here with you, when they came down to visit Haupapa and Aoraki, how did you propose that they hungi to this tupuna, or that they pay their respects in order to be with the tupuna?
That's really, really interesting. And as Janine said, you know, in the start, one of her comments was that when they were meeting Aoraki and Haupapa with a little bit of knowledge and asked, how do we approach it? And my answer was it was you know, maybe a naive answer in the way that's appropriate for you, but in fact, that's the way that we should approach the atua, in a way that's appropriate for yourself. Therefore, it's more meaningful. Once they had approached and built that relationship, and then we started layering on the stories and the understandings of Raka Mau from my perspective, my creation story perspective, alongside their own, and building you know, a cultural third space that makes sense for each individual coming in here, knowing the names of the winds, of Toka, of Waihola, of Koyo, hearing those names and knowing where they come from, but also still acknowledging the mana of their own cultural constructs of how they see that place. So the invitation to breathe, to know that that air is old and it comes from the gods, but also allowing that knowledge system of that air also comes from bushfires in Australia, you know, to allow for those two knowledge systems to sit side by side and be meaningful for the individual.
Kia ora, Ron. I mean, obviously there are people here, you know, manuhiri as well as the team. So that's fantastic, you know, for us that may in the future be privileged to visit that space. That's a lovely, you know, a lovely way to think about how we may approach the glacier when we get to visit the tupuna. That would be amazing. I'm just going to now go to you, Rachel, because obviously as a sound artist myself, I'm absolutely fascinated by your sound capture, your sonic practices, and how that was integrated in this particular project. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you specifically was, how do the sounds that you've captured evoke the voice of Haupapa and Rakumaumau?
Yeah. To answer that, I'll just lead on from what Ron was just discussing about when we went down, and to be honest, was a bit thrown because Ron was unable to make that first visit, and then it was like, oh, okay, yeah. But we did have a lovely ceremony, Heather, Janine and I, where we went up to a point where we could look out and see all the maunga. The weather was clear, and see Haupapa, and karakied and waiated and greeted in our own way. And it was really kind of, we're here to, with good intentions and listening again, just kind of listening and, are we good? We went out onto the boat, and I guess for me, part of that karakia is, I'm listening, and whatever you want to say, I'll be grateful. I'm thinking back to a trip that I made to Hawaii with a Māori group to record, the lava at that stage, and talking to the tangata whenua there. And it was, well, if you're not meant to record, then your gear won't work. It was as simple as that. So we went out on the lake, and I was working with hydrophones, which are very sensitive. So if there's another boat on the, of course, on the lake, the melted Haupapa melting. And if there's any wind, the water slaps up against the side of the boat, and none of those recordings are very good. But then suddenly everything stopped. We had this perfect stillness, and I got some beautiful recordings from the hydrophone. When I say beautiful, I mean it's the sound of Haupapa collapsing. It's a beautiful and really sad sound. It's the booms and the cracks and the rushes of water, and and so that was what I heard through the technology. And I also remember a discussion, I think on our second trip when Ron was there as well, and we were talking about, the idea of having just playing around with ideas about having a more permanent, sound being transmitted from there. But actually that didn't feel right, that it was better to leave the mysteries there, but to kind of visit, to ask permission, and to take some recordings. But that was enough.
And apart from the hydrophones, were there other sound microphones that you used?
I did have a shotgun mic, especially on that first trip. And so there was recordings of the atmosphere and dripping sounds. So when we got close up to the large carved pieces of ice that were floating around in the awa, and there were some beautiful sounds of like the ice kind of tinkling right near the surface. Yep. So some got from just above, and then some was just above the surface, and then some from under the surface.
And how loud is that, Rachel?
It's, well, I mean, it sounds quite loud when you've got your headphones on and you've boosted it when it's in the water. I mean, with the underwater microphones, we were able to go quite close to the terminus, and it sounded like a construction site. Yeah, it was a lot happening.
What's a terminus?
Terminus is the face of the glacier. So
Okay.
where the bits of ice will carve off, and you've got that face that's in front of the water, above
Heather
the water.
knows all about that.
She'll fill you in on all the
She'll know all about that. The other thing I was going to ask you is, like, what other sounds did you pick up aside from the ice and the melting of Haupapa? Were there any other types of bird life, or I don't know, fish life, or anything like that was around?
Not in the water. That was the amazing thing, because I know the sea, and I know the sound of the sea, and all the sound of the bivalves and the fish and all the clicky clacky and things that all go on. So there wasn't that. I was kind of wondering what would be there, whether it would be silent because it's too cold. Having said that, on our last trip, we did see, I think maybe Heather can carry on talking about that, a little frozen baby trout that had somehow made it upstream, which I think, which is not a good sign. But yeah, the actual environment itself is amazingly quiet, and there's the odd introduced birds. And I think driving in towards, we saw the odd eagle, but it was very quiet, very silent. But there was the tussock grass moving, but there's, you'd have to be near that. Mostly, a bit of sound of wind, but not a lot of vegetation for it to shift, because that's often what we hear when we hear wind, is the shifting vegetation. So an amazing, and you could hear water from the distance. So there was water it had different water sources coming down, different rock faces. So you could hear roaring, gentle roaring in the distance. But apart from that, it was, it was really quite silent. Beautiful, yeah.
So and you may or may not be able to answer this, and that's okay if you can't, but from a wider perspective, how do we look to analyze or interpret those sounds as the voice of the atua? What did you sense or feel that the atua was trying to say?
Well, I guess just going back to that, I think for me the most touching recordings is the ones that were underwater, and even though, as I said, that for me they're incredibly beautiful, the sound of that movement of ice and water, but it's tragic. It's the sound of the disintegration of those glaciers, and that's what they had to say. That's what's happening.
Kia ora, Rachel. Thank you for that. It's absolutely fantastic and amazing to hear how you went about your sonic practices in this particular project, and great segue to Heather. Heather, I just wanted to talk to you also about what your we talked earlier before we started this, and we were talking about hopes and aspirations from a Western science point of view, but also from everybody, your hopes and aspirations as a scientist for Haupapa and for Aoraki. So, if you could maybe talk a little bit about, what you did in the project a little bit more, but also, your hopes and the possibilities of how we can help as human beings.
Yeah, ngā mihi Marie. So I guess as a scientist, and as someone who I guess, I grew up in Waimati, and actually very family holidays went to Aoraki, so I first visited Haupapa when I was only 7 years old, and it was a very different looking glacier back then. And so, and I think through my climbing and my tramping and that, I'm not only interested in learning about the glaciers from a scientific perspective, but I guess they're also very special to me as part of just my life and my interactions with nature. And so I guess one of the aspirations I have with this project, because, as scientists, we write scientific papers, we go to conferences, we report back on this data and tell people about what's happening, how much climate's warming, how fast the glaciers are retreating. And a lot of that work, it's great when we can convey that in the classroom to our students and try and inspire our students to be thinking about these things and make changes. But science often only gets so far, right? You often you're talking to people who are already on board with ideas about climate change and that. So sometimes you feel like you're preaching to the converted, for want of a better way of describing it. So the thing I really love about working with the artists and with Mana Whenua is that we actually can reach more people in a different way. And because at the end of the day, if we want people to care for, to do something about the environment, to do something about climate change, they've actually got to want to care. They've got to care to actually want to do something. And so I think the great thing about art is that it reaches people in a different way. Like, you know, if we're looking at our artwork there and listening to the sounds of the glacier and seeing the amazing, like the sounds and the images that Rachel and Janine have captured and Stefan's kind of crafted into these things, and then hearing Ron's voice, we're actually thinking about it in a much more personal way, in a deeper way. And so that hopefully that will inspire people to actually think, oh, okay, maybe I should be paying attention to some of this stuff that the scientists are measuring and telling us, and actually doing something about it. So I guess that's my big hope for it, is that it engages more people in thinking about climate change and actually having a passion to actually want to think about how they live on Earth, how they treat Papatūānuku, and thinking about what they do in their everyday lives and how they can live more lightly on the planet.
Kia ora, Heather. You also mentioned earlier that there is the possibility that the climate, that what's happening to Haupapa could be reversed or could be stabilized. Can you talk more about that, please?
Yeah, so I think the really important thing about Haupapa, like all glaciers, is they are constantly they're constantly like a cycle of renewal. So glaciers are always gaining snow and they're always melting out water, and that's normal for them. That's their life cycle, gaining and losing, like gaining snow, losing water. And so that's normal for them, the cycling of the maku, of the moisture through them. But what's of course changed is with warming, it's the rate that they're losing that mass compared to the rate that they're gaining it. And that's the thing, that the way human beings have been living on the planet, that's what we've changed. So if we actually, so some of the modeling studies, some of my colleagues that do modeling to think about how glaciers might behave in future, what they're finding is if we actually do whole warming, if we can actually reach some of those targets that have been set by these international agreements, if we can whole warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we can actually, the glaciers will stabilize, because that is what they do. Haupapa is looking to balance themselves. They will find a balance between the snow and between the melting water. And so if we actually can slow the warming and stop the warming, the glaciers will also stop retreating and stabilize. Certainly they're going to be way smaller than they are today, but they won't disappear. If we actually take action and we actually follow through on this, and people actually do the right things to stop the planet warming, we can actually keep the snow and ice on the Maunga.
And when you say do the right things, what in particular would you suggest? What are your thinking around this?
Okay, I guess you know, some of the real key things we've got to do is we've got to do something about, you know, emissions, CO2 emissions, fossil fuel emissions. And one thing for New Zealand, one of the things that is a really huge part of our emissions in this country is transport, is all those people getting in their individual cars and driving around to work every day. You know, if we could actually do something about that, if people would start taking more passive options like riding their bikes, walking, using public transport, just thinking about how much they travel and where they travel, and do they need to travel as much? Like if we could actually cut down a lot of that moving around that we do with cars, we would make a difference. So yeah, talking to some of my colleagues at the University of Canterbury that actually work in research in transport and look at alternative ways of designing cities, and that this is one of the things that in New Zealand we can really do something about, because unlike, you know, we have a lot of sort of, well, green, if you like it, we have a lot of hydroelectricity and other ways of generating electricity. We're not burning coal in that at the rate like other countries do, but what we do is we drive our cars everywhere all the time, and that's what would be great if we could do something about that.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. That's such rich information for all of us to consider, and great to know that that there is the possibility that Haupapa will survive if human beings play their part.
Yep.
So kia ora for that, Heather.
Sure.
And now I just wanted to go to you, Stefan, please, and let's have a chat about you know, what are some of the patterns that you can, or the data is telling us about the narrative of the glacier?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so part of the work that I did was to get 1 year of data from NIWA. We had an agreement there, and we use this as a backup in case the live stream stops. So we can fall back to this data, and I analyzed it quite well. I went through it and listened to the story, like what's the snowfall pattern, what are average temperatures, and looking at outliers. So it is quite chaotic with a rhythm. Just to say, it's difficult to describe because I looked at it more from the numerical and programming perspective. So not sure if that answers your question, but
yeah. I mean, was it anything that was unexpected?
Can't say. I wasn't part of the trips down there. And so I was wondering if looking at the data would make me feel like I would have been there. It sort of gave me a little bit of a feeling for it, but it probably doesn't beat the fact being there and listening live.
Yeah, of course. And I suppose as a creative technologist, or you don't like to be called a computer scientist, but as a creative technologist, what was part of the exciting part for you in this particular project?
The challenge of the combining of all these data sources and creating this, we have several layers of data coming in. So when you saw the visualization in the beginning, it is something that is a constant animation. So it looks like it is live data, but in effect, the NIWA network is fairly complicated, and the data is sometimes unreliable. So it is usually sent every 10 minutes. But if the weather's bad and the satellite doesn't get it, then it might take a day, an hour for the data to arrive. So I have several layers which sort of take the historical data, take the latest live data, and try to make a guess what it should be right now. And then when you look at it on your personal device, there's an additional layer making it into this fluid animation. So these different layers of timing in between, that was a nice challenge to solve, but well, you only grow in challenging times. So,
right. So were you the very clever man that wrote the code between NIWA and this project?
And what I liked about it, that this is exactly the stuff that I teach my students. So here is, again, another project that I could actually demonstrate to them live. So this is why you are learning the things that you are learning. It's not just theoretical computer science knowledge. There's actually a reason why this makes sense, why this would be applied here. This is what you do when data is unreliable and stuff like that. So it was perfect. It was exactly during the time when we had these aspects in the lecture. So I could constantly pull up the project and say, oh, by the way, what I'm just doing right now while you are working your assignments is exactly towards this.
So in your opinion, what's, I suppose, what is the value of working with artists in projects like this?
The mind-blowing opening of your horizon of thinking, of using terms that you have never thought about, because like my mind is more technical, but like I don't want to be a computer scientist, called a computer scientist anymore, because I think my thinking has opened up so much in all the projects that I've done with Rachel, with Janine, with a colleague of mine back then who is a typographer. So initially you would look at typographer and computer scientists, what's the combination there? And there was an awesome chemistry there, and there was an awesome chemistry in this project, and with even more fields coming in, and it was awesome.
Oh, fantastic. Kia ora, Stefan. And I'm sure that there will be lots of questions around the whole technology side of things, because it's, from what I'm gathering, each and every one of you have a very, very rich and in-depth understanding of your discipline that we haven't even, or your mātauranga that we've only just really kind of touched on. So I'm hoping that, in the question and answer time, we may be able to look deeper slightly into that. But obviously, you're all contactable should there be any other questions that happen after this. Lastly, I wonder if we want to go to you, Janine. Obviously, you said earlier that you're the glue and that held this project together, and you've got so many of your fellow colleagues in this project that have mihi to you around this particular project. So, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to ask you any questions. I suppose I just would love to hear your kōrero about the project, but I do know that it would be great to also to talk about the wider political implications of art collaborations. You know, what's happening in Egypt, the sustainability, vulnerable communities and ecospheres. And then lastly, you did want to have a kōrero about the Treaty of Fossil Fuels. So I'm going to, don't have any specific questions, I'm just going to hand to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marie. And I've also asked Vida just to play the artwork again, just so we can see those different layers of data that Stefan was talking about. So I might just talk over that once we get the screen sharing happening. But yeah, I think it's been an amazing project to be able to work with a group of people who brought their talents and ideas to it, and to be really quite open to what the end result might be. And so what you can see now on the screen is actually a crazy wind speed dip over here. So this is different lines of data. At the top, we've got solar radiation, we've got a temperature line, we've got wind speed and rainfall. And right at the bottom, we've got the snow depth, which is very pretty much nothing happening there at the moment. So this is a kind of very subtle layer to the interface that if you hover over the left-hand corner of the visualization, it brings up, or of the image and sound work, it brings up this other layer. And initially, Stefan was using this just for coding purposes. But then Rachel and I, on looking at this, thought, yeah, this is actually quite fascinating to know that there are these different parameters that are changing the color of the image. They're changing the brightness of the image. So that relates to how sunny it is. So overnight, the whole image goes quite dark. And then the temperature dictates the amount of how often you'll see a very icy image, or do you see a more watery image. So there's this kind of agency that the elements have, as well as the mihi to them that Ron's voice does in calling out to the ancestors. But there is also a live presence here that is coming from weather stations at Mueller Glacier and at Tasman National Park. So they're giving a signal which Stefan has cleverly combined. Stefan, do you want to jump in anytime to clarify anything else there that you want to add?
Yeah, NIWA gave us access to quite a number of channels, we call them. So temperature, solar radiation, they're all channels. So we looked at the historical data and we looked at the live data to get you need to get a feeling for what numbers do you get. What does it mean if there's 275 watts per square meter solar radiation? Does it mean it's bright? Does it mean it's dark? Does it mean it's a sunny day? So to get the feeling for the data and then come up with ideas, how can we make a certain number, parameter, channel change a certain aspect of the visualization? Like Janine said, the temperature influences the mixture of ice and water. So if we get it warm in 6 months' time, if we look at this, or in our case, in 2 months' time, if we look at this, you probably won't see much ice, whereas then 6 months later, you will probably see way more ice. And the sound of Ron's voice is driven by the wind direction and speed based on these really lots of different wind names that they have. And that was a thing that I like to learn about. What do these names mean? And then try to translate that into the different language of coding. Yeah, again, quite an interesting and great challenge.
You'll notice that there aren't any numbers. So when we were first coding this, we had numbers ticking over, which indicated the temperature and the solar radiation, but we were not allowed to publicly publish those because they are kind of amalgams of NIWA data, and we didn't want to cause any kind of terror of sudden winds by. So instead we have a much more kind of minimal interface, and something that I hope that can bring people into that intimate contact with these fragments of carved glacier that would be floating through this cold water. And from the boat, I had a long, like a sound boom pole, and I had a camera on the end of that, and that was sort of deep down into the water, sort of going right underneath these huge floating fragments of ice. We had to really watch them, because if they tipped, they could destabilize the boat that we were on. So Pancho, the boatman, was sort of pushing us away at moments when the motor would suddenly go on, and we'd kind of have to move out of the zone. So there was an intimacy, but also a kind of precarity that we were brought into contact with through the way that we were coming close to the ice. But I guess one of the most significant moments for me was when Ron was out on the boat with us and began to breathe with these glacial fragments, a hongi to the ice, to the glacier, to the ancestor, Haupapa and Rakamaumau. So these were really moments that honor or allowed us to all attune and be with this changing entity. But it's also really important to me that that at the same time we think about things like advocating for the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty that has been called for this week in the COP27 summit, and to really think about at the same time as as what we feel in our bodies and ourselves, but to also translate that into the steps that we need to take, that Heather's already talked about, to stop this runaway global warming and the loss of in Western terms natural heritage, but for ancestors, for communities who are being displaced from their landscapes through these changes. And I think being part of this World Weather Network platform is an amazing chance to have, I think, I'm not sure how many visitors we've had, but in the first week it was over 1,000. So Stefan's, looking at this on the site. So allowing people to experience the things that are important to us in the Southern Hemisphere, that it's not just abstract. So for me, that's a really important part of the project.
Kia ora, Janine. Well, just being mindful of time, thank you for that, and for everybody that has spoken about this very passionate, artistic and scientific project. It's phenomenal, and more of these are necessary, I think, in my own opinion, in order to bring these sorts of climate changes that are happening in our environments to on a platform that people can relate to and can connect with. So ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. I'm going to just talk to Vida for a moment, who is, I think, Vida, you're going to help us with everybody who would like to turn on their video and their audio. She has control of that, in order to open it up for question and answers to anybody that would like to ask anybody here any questions. So you can either put your hand up or you can use the chat as well.
So yeah, you're welcome to turn on your camera now. So I know there's some amazing people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just while they're doing that, Janine, what camera did you use?
It was just a high-spec GoPro, because it needed to be able to have an underwater housing, but I wasn't up for diving. The water is very grainy as well, so really, really low visibility. So even a diver in there probably wouldn't get very far. So it needed to be something quite kind of compact that could could be able to survive in that very cold and very grainy water. And we found the best place to actually get the colours of the water and the colours of the ice was where there was some fresh water or melted snow, or some of the streams coming in was mixing with the kind of glacial flour, or the viscous kind of texture of the water of the awa.
Wow. And how often did you all, how many times did you all go to visit?
Well, I went there 3 times since I'm starting to conceive this project, which was after meeting Ron and Dunedin, and there was a symposium where I heard him tell some of these kaitahu stories, and it sort of started to trigger in my mind to go to these places, because you made it so vivid in your kōrero, Ron. And so that was for me kind of where the project started, I think. And then we went back another 2 times with hybrid or electric vehicles. And yeah, so that allowed the project to have some kind of gestation, and of course a longer gestation through COVID-19 as well.
Of course. Wow. Anybody out there would like to ask a question? Please, you're more than welcome to, and this lovely panel of presenters would love to answer your questions if you have any.
Yay.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. This has been really fantastic to hear about this an incredible project from everybody who was involved. And I kind of I sort of had a couple of kind of, I guess, technical questions. I was really interested to think about when you started talking about how the data was coming in, and that it was the data was the way in which the imagery and the audio were the imagery and the audio were connected to various pieces of data. And I was just wondering about that. It's not a very interesting question really, but I was really wondering about how, as a group of people collaborating, how did you decide kind of, you know, what data related to what material, and what were the kind of considerations around the relationship between the data and the sort of more material aspects of the project, the recordings and the video and the sound?
Are you asking somebody specifically?
I'm not really. I don't know who would be. I mean, I guess Rachel may. I mean, so if Rachel, you were doing the audio recording, was it then your decision to think about what sort of data that would be relating to in the final project?
Yeah, when we narrowed down the type of data that we would be responding to, then I kind of went and made a list of, you know, the wind direction. I did have some record, you know, all the various things. So I gave Stefan a set of different recordings that related to those different sections. The underwater sound of the glacier was kind of a bass sound. Yeah, it is always there. Yeah, so Haupapa is always there. And then with the other sounds, I mean, some of them, they sound quite synthesizer-y. I was kind of looking for different sounds that could easily, depending on what was happening, they could always evoke a certain, you know, wairua, a certain feeling, a certain mood, you know. And that a lot of those were actually field recordings that were then put through like a resonator. Yeah, so that their textures are actually from the space, but they have there's different frequencies that resonate around them, so they give that kind of bit more kind of a synthesized feel. Yeah, and then they would, so Stefan put those in relationship with those different fields of data. Yeah, and then we did have a listen in to hear how they might stack up, so that you know, all the combinations could potentially work together. Yeah.
there was a lot of back and forth, effectively for somebody who has done software development in industry, where there is a concrete idea in the beginning and then you develop towards something in the end. This was a nightmare. I don't mean this personal, because there was effectively, it was constantly a back and forth between, so what's possible? And I did some technical just proofs of concept, and then we iterated what can we do with that. And after sort of exploding the space that you could explore and do, you end up with this, it would be too complex, it would be too wild. And then basically in the end, minimalism kicked back in. And my wonderful charts were boiled down to only 2 colors and no more numbers. And the amount of channels we could have used to drive the data, it would have been an exponential explosion of possibilities and complexity. So I'm quite happy that we sort of explored. And then, okay, now let's narrow it back down to the things that make sense, that feel right, that sound right, that give you a varied, but not chaotic outcome.
Yeah, because it really wanted that, you know, for myself in terms of the sound, that it is something, you know, you could put the work on and then you could have it go, you could be with it all day.
Yeah.
From my perspective, when I think about data, I was constantly, when I was interfacing with Haupapa and with the conversations that we had, I was consciously referencing those data points of karakia and of whakatauki. Always going back and thinking, rightio, what story do we want to hear from Haupapa and from that environment? How does it link with a narrative that could be karakia or whakatauki? And then what's informing that to allow those data names to come out? You know, when we went through a process of do we include tio and hooker? And it's like, yeah, well, actually we do, because that was the data that was there, and that led itself in. So for me, I view that data in a similar and joint but slightly different way.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Ron, because I wanted to know why you use those particular reo, those words. So thank you for answering that. That's amazing. We have somebody with their hand up, but it doesn't have a name. I'm sorry. Is it Jay?
Ko Juliana aho.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. I've got 2 questions that kind of relate to what Rachel spoke of earlier, and what Ron and I believe it was Shelley were speaking of just now, and they do relate. And this is really less of a kind of interrogation question, more of a kind of wondering with you kind of thing. The thing that I wonder is, first of all, what if data was understood as just another form of energy that was manifesting itself? Would it lose its measurability? Would its bodies somehow become more mutable, less defined? And would it be necessary and even desirable to embrace the chaotic? I'm pushing back a little bit here. And please, I'm going to say both questions or thoughts at the same time, because they do overlap. And the second one is, Rachel, when you were speaking, you mentioned how the sounds of the glacier were speaking, voicing maybe its own demise, which I have to admit, for me, sounds a little bit like personification of a natural or another natural entity. And I'm just wondering if how do we know that is what the glacier is sounding and then speaking, and then is that the message? Or is there possible another message that, because if we don't personify, if we don't give it a entity quality like that, that it's Maybe it's giving another message.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in just to finish that, and I mean that just to follow on from that, and then hand over to the others. Yeah, I don't claim to be a a element whisperer, and yeah, and totally personification. I guess that's a feature of Te Ao Māori, is that personification of elements, in terms of yeah, so speaking that things have a voice rather than just make sounds. Yeah, so I guess that's why I'm talking about in terms of what the glacier might be saying. So no, I cannot say definitively what the atua are saying. This is what I understood of what I was hearing. Yeah, was this movement, was this melting of the glacier. And this is what's happening now. It may not herald the demise in the in the long term.
Can I jump in?
Yes, Ron.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for the question. And there are two wonderful little points that come up for me with that question. When you talked about data being energy, and my reflection on that is of course it is, because data has mauri. Data has a life force. It has an energy that's informed by whatever the mauri that informs that thing, if that makes sense. I see breath has mauri, and therefore breath can be data, insofar as when we articulate those names and the places they came from, they can either be articulated and heard as, or, which is really interesting in the fossil fuels conversation, because when we with the trees, it takes all the bad stuff and the good stuff, and we, I don't know how to articulate it, data set very well. Yeah, so yes, data has mauri, and if we think about, instead of those logocentric data points, and think about the feeling mauri points, then they all tell, and that's the beauty of this project for me, is they all tell exactly the same story, just through the energy. The second thing that came up for me that's associated with logocentrism, with that idea of things making logic, is even that term personification of the atua. The last thing I want to do is turn them into a person or understand them from my reference point. And from I would suggest perhaps from a Western Descartesian perspective of knowing and of data points, if we could, that we say people are the ultimate, and then if everything else can match up to being a person, if we can personify that thing, then we can rationally, logically understand it. I think what I'd like to suggest in this project is we're depersonifying it. We're letting it have its own breath, its own voice, its own data, its own mauri. And if we're lucky enough to be able to understand the mauri and the breath of the atua, it can tell us things that we don't know, and things that perhaps we've locked our mind off to for a long time. So there's just a couple of small thoughts for me.
Kia ora, Ron. Yeah, I like to tautoko that too, Ron, because I don't see our atua as personifications. They are, they're not, yeah, in the way that Mātauranga Māori or Te Ao Māori perceive Te Kaiao is not as a personification. And in fact, we are very low on the list of whakapapa when it comes to them. And it's probably a difference of worldviews of how we look at things. And I suppose the other thing I wanted to talk with you, Rachel, too, is that, when you said about, this is a great question, by the way, Julianne, this is a fantastic question and great for us to kind of expand upon this, is that it's rather than it's a listening experience, but it's a felt experience. So I would understand, Rachel, if I'm correct, that when you listened back or were at near the glacier or the tupuna, that it's not only about what you hear, but it's what you feel. And so that feeling, that Māori that you're interacting with is going to be interpreted in the way that only you can express that, because you're there exchanging that ha, that ho, and that Māori. Would that be correct in that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in some ways, backtracking when using that term kind of personification, I guess I'm kind of thinking more, and I think it's probably lazy language, and it's a good pointing out of that, but more in terms of a being of sorts, and really responding to that, you know, that being, as you say, as they are. But absolutely, as I said, I don't claim to be able to interpret, but it's that exchange, and that the Māori and the and certainly a kind of a feeling in the space.
That was an amazing question. It opened up a great conversation. Thank you so much for that question, Juliana. We do have one question here. I think it's Bobby. How did or will you connect with other glacier countries in the world, especially in regards of meta-narratives? Kia ora.
I was thinking as Heather was talking about, you know, what we're doing to doing everything we can so that glaciers don't disappear entirely, and how fast they are going in the northern hemisphere as well. And I think Bridget actually showed me pictures of the glaciers in the Swiss Alps that were wrapped, that had covers to stop them from shrinking, in the hope that we will manage to, you know, keep our warming at not above 1.5 degrees. So yeah, there is a sense that every place will have its own whakapapa or genealogy or connection to their glaciers in the same way that, you know, that we do here, or that we're articulating here. And I hope that through the World Weather Network platform, where there are a number of projects about glaciers in different places and reports, that you know, that there is a sense of a picture of these reports from different places, at the same time as the floods in Pakistan and the droughts in the Sudan. So there is a kind of cumulative picture of similar art projects to ours. But Heather, do you want to say something about that as well? I mean, also I'm interested in your thinking about data as energy too, and as well as the meta narratives, but I know that we need to finish fairly soon. But
yes, I think as a scientist, I have to say I don't know if I really even understand what a meta narrative is, so I won't risk myself of commenting. But yeah, I mean, of course, I definitely agree that data is energy. You know, and it's just a way of describing it, right? You know, it's just like putting something, as we understand, as a number or something, or measuring. It's just a way that we have, I guess, as people, to kind of monitor and measure, and so yeah, I kind of it is an energy, because I guess it's describing a system. You know, like the temperature of something or the speed of the wind is describing the way the way Earth works, and so and it's all about energy and energy and stuff moving from place to place. But yeah, I think in terms of connecting around the world, like I think is like this is the thing, you know, like what we're observing here on our glaciers in Maunga in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is we're seeing this around the world, and I think, though, you know, as I was just talking earlier about how, you know, glaciers are systems and they will look to find balance. I think that one of the really important things is that the rate of change and the rate of recession that we are seeing, not just in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but all around the world, it's unprecedented, the speed that the ice is melting around the world, and so that's the thing we've really got to address. And so I think it would be amazing if we can if you know this project is of inspiration to others, or that we can keep our collaboration ongoing in different ways, and thinking about how we can reach further by combining art and science to just help people understand climate change. And I think, you know, the conversations like Ron and Rachel and that we're talking about, like what feelings are invoked when you're looking at things. And I think that is the really important thing, isn't it? Like, you know, thinking about data as energy, I guess, is important, because that's energy. If we think about it as energy, that's different to just seeing a number. And it's like, if we think about what we feel when we hear the sounds of the melting ice and stuff, that's the stuff that's really important. And that's, I think, that's the huge value of I think, this artwork, and trying to get people to be inspired more in that way.
Kia ora, Heather. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'm just, oh yes, fantastic. Kia ora.
Hello. May I hop in? I have to apologize. I came in late, so I didn't see the first almost an hour of the presentation, but I've been really enjoying the conversation since then. I'm calling in from San Francisco, California, and looking forward to a project we'll be hosting in New Zealand next year, actually, which brought me roundabout to this event. Nice to see you, Janine. I think we'll be speaking next week. But I just had a question about time in respect to glacier projects about glaciers, thinking about how to represent glacial time and make it present for those of us who are operating on a shorter time scale. I'm thinking of a couple of projects that Olafur Eliasson presented in I think 2018, 2019. There was a project where he brought, I think I can chat a link in here actually. Ice Watch, I think, was the first project that brought, I think it involved harvesting ice from a glacier in Greenland, or select glaciers in Greenland, and then placing them in London, in downtown London, so that passersby could witness them melting in front of them, be much more proximate to them, and also experience the time that it takes for a block of ice to melt. As well as a project that he did, I think, a couple of years later, comparing photographs of glaciers from 1999 to 2019 as ways. These are just examples, just, you know, sort of well-known examples of how time is represented in glacier art. And I'm curious if you could say more about how you're thinking about time and representing this work that you're looking at, and just how time showed up in your process.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Who would like to answer that? Janine, maybe, or Ron?
Yeah,
Heather?
well, I suppose, I mean, I know that Ron will have other thoughts about time, because his whakapapa he's talking about deep time, and when we think about the release of the air, these little tiny sort of bubbles that you can see in our images, I think, as opposed to Olafur Eliasson's Ice Watch, which was first in Paris, actually, at the COP event, COP event there in, I think, 2009. And I think, you know, to be able to touch that, you know, the impact of that work is in physically bringing it there, but at the same time, there was a huge energetic expense in that, which is sort of well upfronted in the project. So I suppose we were also hoping to bring people closer to the deep time of the air, the breath of the ancestors, which you can see by allowing this kind of intimate view, albeit mediated by the screen. But real time was quite important to me, like present time, like this is now, and this is what is happening in the glacier, this representation through live data, the liveness of it. Although the images, you know, we're responding to a pattern of what the live data was telling them, that obviously is pre-recorded. But I think so I think, yeah, there are definitely different times in the work, and Ron, do you want to have a last korero about time? Do you want to say anything? Yeah.
I will, but I'm not exactly sure what time is. Insofar as when we were there, we were there at a certain place with the Māori being what it was. That's continuous, because the Māori, that life energy is connected to the whakapapa, to the layers of people and events and stories that go way back through this thing called time. So from that, I would propose from an iwi Māori perspective, time isn't a lineal. Time is a mishmash of all sorts of things, because when we're in there and breathing that air that was breathed by the atua who are in the sometimes we think about whakapapa as genealogy, and it is, insofar as we're connected to the landscapes that we live in by the Māori and the energy forms and forces that have informed where we are. I don't think I'm answering this question very well, but from my perspective, when we're breathing in, right now we're breathing in from the past. When we're breathing out, we're breathing into the future. That's one thing I think about time that this project showed me. You're breathing in from the past, and everything that we give is going into the future. So we're both things all at once, as well as this point.
Kia ora, Ron. I just was putting a few little definitions of for our manuhiri from San Francisco, so he can have a bit more understanding of what you mean by whakapapa and Māori. So I hope that's answered your question. Well, gosh, to answer a question around time is we need more time. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions before we whakamutunga end our night? Okay, in that case, I would just like to extend a huge congratulations to everybody that's involved in this particular project. Haupapa, the Chill Breath of Raku Mau Mau, is an online data response artwork that is available to engage with. So before we go, maybe we could put that into our chat. So if any of our manuhiri that are here tonight would like to continue to look at that. Also, the World Weather Network as well is absolutely worth looking at. So to Ron, Rachel, Heather, Stefan and Janine, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, thank you so much for joining us. To Te Tuhi, thank you for hosting this and co-hosting us with Laser Talks, and to Niwa, and to obviously AUT, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. To finish us off, we're just going to have a little karakia whakamutunga. Uhia maira ko te wairua tapu hei pueru mō te iwi me te aroha o te rongarawa. Ua noa nei ki te whenua toi mai rangi noa ki ngā tangata katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tai e.